there's probably around about 50,000 contractors in the Philippines alone working for Australian firms. Was that ASIC are now doing their 2025 investigation to financial planning industry and the Philippine outsourcing. They are very interested in how data is stored offshore for financial planning firms. It's transferred, and then what data security measures are being put in place. That data is either stored on computers or sent out to clients or back to the financial planners. They're about to announce in July that they're not going to allow any of their financial planning firms to have staff working from home. They have to be working from an office.
Good afternoon. Welcome to episode 77 of UncommonCents. This is an unplanned breaking news version of UncommonCents. I've got Brian Jones here from VA Platinum. For those that don't know or just catching up, there's been a particular Fair Work outcome or Fair Work case that we've been following for a little while within the industry, but they've released the results, Brian, yesterday. And so we thought we'd jump on live on UncommonCents to have a quick discussion about what the issues are, what we should be thinking about in terms of the industry and what we're currently potentially doing within financial planning firms and what the broader industry should be thinking about. So, Brian, to kick it off, I think everyone knows you, but maybe 30 seconds on who you are, and then if you can summarize the story that you've known to date in relation to the particular Filipino worker for the law firm.
Okay, sounds good, Dean. So hi everyone, I'm Brian Jones. I'm the founder of VA Platinum, an outsourcing firm in the Philippines. We specialize in financial planners, mortgage brokers, lawyers, accountants, and then anyone that those businesses actually refer to us. I was a burnt out financial planner from way back, and I systemized the business. I hired team members in the Philippines, and my whole life, my whole business turned around. Not so much like the focus wasn't on the business turning around, it was definitely on my lifestyle turning around. So that's why I now help other businesses to try and emulate that same sort of freedom in winning back your own time and spending more time with family and hobbies and doing what you love. So that's me, Dean. And this case, it's so exciting to see this. So this is a watershed case, meaning that it has set a precedent where a lady, Joanna Pascal, who was employed as a contractor working from Manila, from her home, for a firm in Queensland. And she was terminated early last year, and she took that firm to Fair Work Australia claiming unfair dismissal. And in September last year, Fair Work Australia had a preliminary hearing, and they said, yes, actually, rather than being a contractor, she was treated as an employee because the firm told her what to do, the hours to work, which is 8:30 to 5. They reviewed the quality of her work. She couldn't take on another job, so she was effectively an employee.
Understood.
And so in September, Fair Work said, there is a case to be heard. And then the findings of that final case came out yesterday, where it was confirmed she was effectively an employee under the Fair Work Act. So that company now has to, I presume, pay back pay under the award wages of an employee here in Australia, even though she's a Filipino resident living and working from home in the Philippines. Amazing.
And so break those two parts down, I think, Brian, in terms of the contractor component. So I think everyone would be currently listening in. So I hire contractors in Australia all the time. I've got a contract paraplanner. Why, if you know, why aren't they employees?
Also, they possibly should be. So it's called a sham contract. And if you just Google it and put in the ATO, Australian Tax Office sham contract, there's actually like a quiz that you can do to see whether or not somebody, even though you might put them on as a contract, they might actually be deemed as an employee and have rights as an employee. A contract paraplanner in Australia, they might work for 5 or 6 other firms, and they might be justifiably be a contractor to each of those firms. Whereas if someone is working, 3 days a week, and that's all they want to work because they're looking after kids, and they only work for that one firm, typically they'd be classified as an employee because they've agreed on the set hours that they're going to work for only that one client.
Yep.
That one client tells them what to do, how to do it, and checks the quality of their work. So that would be a sham contract if they were put under a contract, and they would have different entitlements under Australia's Fair Work Act.
And so a couple of things that come to mind is the payroll tax obligations, superannuation obligations, annual leave or annual leave loading, if you could argue that the employee was casual, as well as potentially all the OH&S obligations as well in terms of that. And they're the four that just come to mind in our particular conversation. And so what's the next step? What should we be thinking?
So I would recommend every employer who has got, especially the overseas workers, it could be Thailand, Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, they're the common outsourcing countries. I'd be putting into, the ATO website, going through and trying to work out, going through doing the quiz, are they actually contractors or could they be classified as employees? Because I know for certain lawyers are now clamoring all over this, thinking, wow, we could now have class actions. There's probably around about 50,000 contractors in the Philippines alone working for Australian firms.
Yeah, and so this is not just financial planning, but it's more broader. And going through that ATO process, I often talk to people about the question as to whether you're unfortunately participating in what I would call money laundering, i.e. you're paying your contractor through a really common means of paying them. So you're transferring money to them through PayPal or Wise or some other international funds transfer process, but you actually have very little idea as to whether they're paying tax on that income. But yet in your Australian tax return, I'd probably say you're claiming a tax deduction on that income. And so it's definitely an issue there, Brian, as well, to make sure that if you think something's deductible, it has to be assessed on the other. We have to be sure that it's assessed on the other side.
And what we see happen is that nearly over 90% of the cases in the Philippines, when a business in Australia is paying that Filipino as a contractor, that Filipino is not claiming tax, like they're not putting it through as assessable income. And now that the Fair Work Australia has come out and said, hey, listen, you could actually, as a Filipino, go after that person in that company in Australia. If that Filipino gets audited and they haven't been paying tax, all of a sudden they've got to find a huge amount of money to pay their tax bill. What are they going to do? They're going to go to the Fair Work Australia and say, hey, I need more money from that employer in Australia. That's the only last resort they're going to do because they've already spent everything that they've received.
Correct. It's the old contractors that happened back in the day that got paid pre-tax money and then forgot they had to save it on the side. And on the flip side of this, if you think about that as the scenario, then if they got deemed as an employee and we were paying them $100, potentially everyone would assess that as the net amount. And so the company has to remit the superannuation and the pay and the income tax to the ATO on the net amount. So the business owner could be up for, on top of the $100 they've already paid, the $12 for superannuation and the, whatever it might be, 0 to 25% income tax on behalf of their employee.
Absolutely. Yep. As you're pointing out, Dean, it's like a cascading list of things that will now come out of this. We don't know what will come out of it, but these are all the possibilities that lawyers will now be clamoring over this, going, well, what can we now do to represent Philippine contractors? And can we now get more money for them? Superannuation, does the company now have to pay payroll tax? Does this now tip some companies in Australia over the payroll tax thresholds, where they now have to pay payroll tax on all their Australian wages as well, that they never had to previously pay?
Yep, so, absolutely.
Yeah.
So what haven't we spoken about yet in terms of the understanding of the case? Like what's not been said in the articles that we've read that you know about because you've been following it more closely? What do we need? What else is out there?
What hasn't been put into any of the articles is how Australian companies can avoid being put in this position that this company Doicel has been put in. And that is simply that the Philippine team members should be employed by a Philippine entity. So, that's why, with VA Platinum, this is not a plug, but this is why we've set it up the way we have, is that for data security and for employment law, we've set up 2 entities in the Philippines, and that's how we employ the Philippine team members that still work full-time for clients in Australia. But those Philippine team members are protected under the Philippine law, right? So, and we know the Philippine law is very employee favored. They are very much against overseas companies like us employing team members and treating them unfairly. So whenever it comes to, who can win in a court case in the Philippines, it's typically the employee who, is lent towards by a judge because they think, well, an overseas company from Australia, they can afford to pay out money to a Philippine worker.
Yep.
So Philippine workers are very much protected, whereas if a business in Australia is contracting a Philippine worker in the Philippines, there's no protections at all for that Philippine worker. They could be sacked in a moment's notice, like today, and their access to work is turned off 30 minutes later. But equal
and that's
to that,
the concept of unfair, which we may not have spoken about, is the unfair dismissal component of this. Is that there's really these 2 parts. Is that we focused on the contractor part, which is the first when they went contractor into actually you're a deemed employee.
Yep.
And then the deemed employee being in terms of this unfair dismissal, we now are in this situation where if you've got contractors, you need to performance manage them as if they're an employee in order to performance management manage them out of the company as opposed to just firing a contractor.
Absolutely. And I think this is the loophole that many Australian businesses have tried to use. And it's mostly small Australian businesses where they just find a contractor on one of the job portals in the Philippines and they think that they don't have to treat them as well. Like they don't have to treat them, can I dare say, as a human being, where they get to know them, get to know their family, their experience, where they live, what movies they like to watch. They don't really incorporate them into their business. They treat them as a task doer. And those team members therefore don't feel as valued and they may not perform as well. If they don't perform as well, that's when a business just goes, you're dismissed. And they can't do that now under this Fair Work Australia case. They have to go through that performance management that you're talking about. And
so this is not a situation, barring this one, where the deemed employee might mean that they have to meet the minimum wage of Australia. Is that this? Do you think that is then going to apply to the Filipino entities that you and others have set up? Is that where this is heading, or is that too far of an experiment?
No, we've already received legal advice from 3 different law firms just to make sure we covered our bases. And no, so long as we have our Philippine entities set up, which we do, they're registered, they pay their tax on time, and we employ all staff under those entities, we're absolutely protected. I am a member of 2 mastermind groups for outsourcing firms that are owned by Australians operating the Philippines. And I tell you, the messages I'm getting this morning is some of those firms have got half employees, half contractors. All of those contractors are about to be made employees.
Yeah, understood. So I'm sure 1 or 2 of those masterminds might be watching right now as well, Brian, just to get the tips from us as well. So anything else in terms of what else hasn't been said?
There was no mention, and they're 2 different government agencies, right? ASIC and Fair Work Australia. So what I was thinking might have come in through the Fair Work Australia ABC article was that ASIC are now doing their 2025 investigation into financial planning industry, Australian financial planning industry, and the Philippine outsourcing market.
So tell us a little bit more about that. That's an important thing that most financial advisors may not be aware of about the research that ASIC is currently doing.
Got it. Okay, so ASIC have come out and said, and it's already begun, so we've already been meeting with ASIC ourselves, that they are very interested in how data is stored offshore for financial planning firms, how it's transferred, and then what data security measures are being put in place when that data is either stored on computers or sent out to clients or back to the financial planners. Now, ASIC, initially, they weren't aware that so many contractors or employees were actually just working from home, and that the data security measures weren't in place, which means somebody could have a laptop and they're going to work at a local cafe that has no security on that Wi-Fi router.
Yep.
And emails can be intercepted, the data can be hacked, and the financial planner's entire client database could be exposed.
Absolutely.
And that's what ASIC is now looking at. They're looking at, well, wow, we thought, initially when we talked to them, they were thinking that most of the industry was using financial planners, were using firms like ours with government grade data security. Whereas there's a reasonable percentage of financial planning firms that might have started out working with firms like ours, but then they thought, you know what, we need to cut some costs. We want to save some money. We're going to get these staff working from home, working on laptops, and they don't have any of the government grade data security measures in place. So
absolutely.
And that's going to factor into this contractor model as well. It's all going to kind of layer and cascade down so that you'll have multiple government agencies in Australia now looking at the outsourcing industry.
And I know that that's another one of those contractor tests about do you provide the tools of trade to your employee? If you are paying for their internet, you are paying for their computer, you are paying for things so that they can work for you. That's actually one of those other tests in relation to the employee. So I can see how all of this is interrelated. And so what's a practice that might find themselves in this situation? What's a medium-term plan for them, do you think? Like, are they knocking on you and your competitors' doors to bring a contractor into this world?
That's very common. So once ASIC came out last year and said, this is our plan, we are getting financial planners and mortgage brokers, even though ASIC's not focusing on mortgage brokers just yet, it's really financial planners. We're finding businesses are getting out in front of this, and they're coming to us saying, hey, we've actually had this contractor working for us from home for the last 2-3 years. And it's either, can they please come and work for your company, but still work for them as an employee in our office, or can they keep working from home, but under the protection banner of our company in the Philippines? And that is becoming far more common than going the other way, where they're trying to hire contractors direct.
And Brian, tell us a little bit about from an Filipino employee perspective, what's better for them about coming into this world? Because obviously there's a perceived income differential, which might be the reason why they're doing it first and foremost. But what are the real employee benefits of an employee working within a group? Doesn't have to be VA Platinum directly, but just why do they want it?
Yeah, sure. Let me go through a bit of a case study, if I can, with you. We had, in fact, it was my third ever client to join VA Platinum. So they've been with us for a long time. And they came to us saying, listen, we're thinking about hiring our 3 team members directly. Can we buy them off you VA Platinum? We're like, no, because ASIC's doing this. They're protected under our banner. And when we met with the 3 employees, 2 of them were thinking, you know what? We don't have children. We're single. Maybe we'll take a risk and we'll become contractors and not pay any tax. And one of the employees was like, I'm also single, but I like all of the protections that I get from VA Platinum because I've got a mortgage, I've got, a future family that I'm planning, and they get, therefore, private health insurance for them and any family members. They get SSS, which is superannuation. They get Paggy Big, which is towards a government-funded home loan.
Okay. Yep.
And then from our point of view, we have to go through all of those same 3 warnings that the Australian legal system has when we're trying to remove an employee. So in the Philippines, though, it's not just 3 strikes. You actually have to give them massive opportunities to improve and train them. So the Philippine team members, they know that it's not just if they're not performing. If they don't perform, we have to actually put in place training programs to help them raise them up to perform. So if you then think about ASIC, and they can now come in and shut down any financial planning business, I presume, next year and the year after, once they release their guidelines, if there's not the appropriate government grade data security, which means an employee could get sacked in a heartbeat if they're acting as a contractor working from home rather than working in an established business. So there's so much for an employee. And then if you think about our office setup, gymnasium, yoga studio, fully cooked breakfast, every single day, monthly activities, huge Christmas parties, there's a lot of fun activity and we look after employees. Whereas if you're working from home,
you miss a bit of that.
You miss a lot of that. A lot.
And we've got both, like in our experience, we have both team members that work remotely in the Philippines and team members that work directly in your office. For full disclosure, most people know anyway. Yeah. But there's a difference in what they get to do at lunchtime between those two parts. And some people wanted the convenience, and this was COVID and post-COVID, and some people wanted the connection and that ability to go down and have a coffee with a colleague. And we're seeing the changes as they become more senior within the companies or experienced within our companies. They start to get the same flexibilities as an Australian employee, that we're not watching. There's no watching the clock. We're not focused. If they want to have a coffee break at 10:50, they're not telling us. They don't have to tell us. They've got this flexibility within the framework, and that's enjoyable to them versus taking the risk by working completely as a contractor at home, as well as, frankly, some of the other organizations where they work predominantly for American firms. It's in a shitty time zone. Yeah. So you can't go out for a coffee at 3:00 in the morning because you don't want coffee and maybe they're not open. So I can see the great difference between working under the umbrella versus obviously working directly. And you and your team, Brian, are thinking about these issues 24/7.
We really are. And we're hearing so many AFSLs are now thinking about this, where I just heard even yesterday, and I don't think it's got to do with the Fair Work case. I think it's got to do with the ASIC work. They're about to announce in July that they're not going to allow any of their financial planning firms to have staff working from home. They have to be working from an office. And
oh, really?
Yeah.
As you can see, I'm working from home right now, as are you.
Sure. Oh, this is only for the Philippine workers.
Oh, this is only for the Filipinos.
Yeah, okay. So the AFSLs are coming out saying if you've got Australian employees, they can work from home, from cafes. If they're working from overseas, they must work in a government-grade, data-secure environment.
It's a really interesting thing about how we have to trust our employees. So it's always this question that I talk to advisors about, is just we need to have these brick walls in place around data security processes, logging in, how we log into systems, how we do multi-factor authentication, all of these pillars of security. And then the last one is kind of the interviewing and trust perspective, because it doesn't matter whether it's an Australian or Filipino or anywhere in the world, if the employee as the human wants to take some information or memorize it, they can. And there's very little that you can do about that. There's brick walls, but we have to avoid those people that we incorrectly hire at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess where I'm going to see towards the end of this year and next year, what's going to play out is ASIC will release these guidelines. AFSLs will say, you can no longer have staff working from home. Those financial planners that have got contractors working from home will now say, we don't want to come and work in the office. And the financial planner will then have to say, I'm terminating you as my contractor. That contractor will now go, guess what, financial planner? The Fair Work Act says I can now take you to Fair Work Australia and you're going to have to pay me a whole lot of money because I'm going to be treated as an employee from an Australian point of view. And that financial planner is going to have to go through the headaches and time with Fair Work Australia that will stop them seeing their own clients and driving their business forward. They'll suffer that stress, the anxiety of going through the Fair Work Australia process, and then they're going to have to pay out money to these contractors. So
absolutely. And Fair Work is like the ombudsman in a context, Brian, that it's a complementary service to employees, essentially. Would you say that?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. It's for the benefit of employees, not for the benefit of employers. It helps employers because they offer a free legal advice around what structures and what wages to set. But this is now, as we say, it's a watershed. It's a precedent that it's opened the floodgates now. So financial planning firms must take action really soon.
Yep.
So that they're ahead of future legal action.
And so getting ahead of this is now two different components of what we've spoken about today, is that we need to get ahead of the contractor versus employee debate. And so that is to theoretically find a partner in the local country that you might be working with that can put that employment banner across the employee. And there's a variety of firms, as Google will tell you, that can find the right firms overall.
Oh, look, Dean, there's only one, but that's okay. It's us.
Yeah, that's okay. We can see the logo on it's assumed, Brian. So the first
there are
thing
lots of good
remember,
firms. There are.
There's a variety of firms that you can do in terms of provide that umbrella service. And so that's the step number one, but that doesn't necessarily solve step number two, where we're going to be either affected by ASIC or our licensees, which is a new component, that we're going to have to ask those employees or contractors to come back into the office. And so that's a really important one. I know that we've got 8 staff that are working remotely at the moment. And so if our AFSL said bring them into the office, we'd have to ask them, they'd have to come into the office. And they, broadly speaking, they know that they would have to do that. And they're under an employment arrangement. We don't know, Brian, what would happen if they said no. From the Filipino employment law perspective, we're going to have to you and I will have to brainstorm that one.
Yeah. And I think the good news is ASIC are only going to, from what I know, come out with guidelines. So it's not going to be law. But then AFSLs, depends on their compliance teams, they will then take the guidelines and decide what the rules are for the financial planning firms under them.
Absolutely.
I think that's where it'll be driven from, which is
typically is. And what's happened in history is the AFSLs are most likely to swing the pendulum to be more secure first, because they don't all understand yet in terms of what companies like VA Platinum do. There's some AFSLs out there that don't really understand it because they haven't put time and effort into understanding it. And so the rules probably are harder first, and then potentially advisors start to negotiate and teach the AFSLs, and they may come back. But yeah, we're probably finished the days where you can work from a cafe in a coffee shop in Cebu in the Philippines and work on an SOA.
Yeah, and that is
probably should have never been a day.
It should never have been allowed to happen. And it just has, when most financial planners start, they go, data security is one of the most important things. And then they start to build up trust, as you're saying, Dean, with your team members. And once you build up trust in the team member, more flexibility is given. And then those team members go from a desktop computer that can't be moved to a laptop that can be moved. And then those team members, they like to go to Starbucks, and they like to work for 3 hours from Starbucks in the morning to get their community fix, given they're just working from home and they kind of want to get out of their home environment.
And the other one that it's come across my desk of late is the concept of moonlighting. So it was done, everyone, I hope, understands the concept of moonlighting, but it's when you do essentially you're doing 2 jobs at the same time. And definitely there's a higher probability, Brian, that someone could be moonlighting when they're working remotely versus if they're in the office with you, they can't be moonlighting at that particular point in time. It doesn't stop them, though, leaving that job and having a second job, which might be doing the same thing. And I'm not even sure if there's a problem with that at the moment.
Huge problem, Dean. Huge.
Tell me.
So we've got a tool that we have on every team member's computer, and it tracks how many keystrokes they're making, how many mouse clicks they make, and we can see when their keystrokes and mouse clicks decrease to the point that they might be doing 15 minutes of work for the client that we've hired them to work for. All of a sudden, there's a 10 to 15 minute gap where they're not doing any work. And then there's 10 to 15 minutes of work that they're doing for us again. Yeah. And we can see these slots of time. And it's only on those team members working from home that we see this happening. And that's the indicator that they're moonlighting. They've got a second job.
And so in that scenario, Brian, there's 2 laptops. They're working on this one for 15 minutes, coming across to this one to work 15 minutes. And so that's where they're getting paid 2 salaries in an 8-hour period.
Absolutely. And they get, after 2 years, they get quite proficient, quite good at their job. And it's usually at that 2-year mark when they start moonlighting, because they go, you know what? My financial planner in Australia, they don't really know what I'm doing. As long as I get the output, I'm getting the outcome, getting the work done, they can now go, you know what, I'm not going to ask for any more work because then I'm alerting them to the fact of how efficient I am. Instead of asking for more work, I'll have another laptop beside me. And that's only happening for work from home team members.
Yes, because you don't allow laptops or other computers in the office. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Brian, in the last conclusion of today, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you thought was really important to tell the listeners to be aware of at this point in time?
I think what a lot of us miss, maybe, Dean, a little bit from an Australian perspective, is that the Philippines still is a developing nation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we look, even though we're aware of the economic benefit because there's lower wages for a full-time employee, roughly 1/3 of the cost of an Australian employee is what you have to pay in the Philippines.
Mm-hmm.
They're still a developing nation and money does matter.
Yep.
So if you don't have frameworks and processes in place to protect you as a business, Philippine workers now have an avenue to claim against you. And as a developing nation, why wouldn't they do that? And we know that team members, rather than asking for time off if they've done overtime, they ask for more pay. Or if they can not take annual leave, they'll say, can I just keep working through and take it off as annual leave as I've taken it, but pay me instead and I'll keep working. So that's kind of been missed in all of the communication around this, is that we have to be aware of the different mindset from developing nation employees compared to Australian employees. And that will reflect then in the activities that flow through this year and next year.
Yep. Okay. Well said. Good thing to think about. So, Brian, if anyone wants to get in contact with your team, www.vaplatinum.com.au. Brian has a great team of business development specialists that know and understand financial planning in detail, as well as mortgage brokers and the like. I've chatted to most of them over the years. So reach out to VA Platinum if you need to have a more detailed conversation around navigating the next few months as we learn more about these cases and potentially see more cases in the future.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me to this, Dean. Hot off the press.
Thanks, Brian. I also look forward to our run up the hill in Bright next week on Friday morning. So for anyone that is in Bright, you can meet at the cafe at 7 a.m. and we'll do a hill sprint together.
Absolutely. I'd like to see a lot of financial planners come to town for that.
Very good. Appreciate your time, Brian. Thanks everyone. That was the episode 77. We call this the breaking news episode. It was not planned, but happy to jump in and have the conversation. Thank you very much, Brian, and enjoy the rest of your day, ladies and gentlemen. Bye-bye.
Bye.